Welcome back to the Brittany Hughes Show, everybody. Happy Thursday. Hope you're having a good week so far. So funny story. Do you guys remember last year when Yosemite was on fire? It was a really big deal. It was thousands of acres that were on fire out west. And, it caught national attention. And I'm starting to lose track, frankly, of all of the fires that have been raging, particularly up in Canada. Down here in Virginia, of course, every other day we can't go outside because of all the smoke that's smogging up our air and making it practically unbreathable. You can't take your kids to the playground or, to the pool or anything. Can't even enjoy your summertime because of all of the smoke that comes down from Canada. Because, of course, as we all know, they can't manage their forest floors. And of course, all of the leftists and all of the climate change nuts and the left-wing politicians that profit off of that fear-mongering and continue to use it to get votes and to get money and all of that, they automatically blame all of these wildfires on climate change. It doesn't matter what it is. Everything is climate change. It turns out the Yosemite fire, the Oak Fire, it destroyed like 6 houses and forced thousands of people out of their homes, and like 3 firefighters got injured in fighting this thing. It was a really big deal. And there were headline after headline after headline last year about how climate change was to blame for this wildfire. Yep. Turns out it was arson.
In Mariposa County, a 71-year-old man has been arrested, accused of starting last year's Oak Fire. The fire consumed thousands of acres and hundreds of homes.
So, as so often is the case, facts have to take a backseat to pushing a narrative. We know now that it was likely arson. A 71-year-old man named Edward Frederick Wackerman, that's a name for you, from Mariposa, California, has been arrested and charged with felony aggravated arson and a bunch of other crimes in connection with the Oak Fire. And it's just another one of those situations where, you've got all of this being blamed on climate change, and, the world is getting hotter and we're all going to die in a fiery inferno. And, I know we've avoided all of these apocalypses that have been predicted now for the past 2 decades. We're supposed to be dead like 4 times over now, at least. Funny story for you there, just to start off. But this week has been no shortage of ridiculous nonsense, and it starts to get almost difficult to sift through. One of the latest things that I've seen come up is, have y'all seen this Snow White reboot that Disney is making? They're in the woke propaganda business. We all know that at this point. They're constantly rebooting and remaking animated films because Hollywood has apparently completely run out of new and original ideas. Things were just too good back then, all of these good films that were made. And now Hollywood can't come up with anything new, so they just revamp the same old stuff. There's even talk of Moana being made into a live action film, even though Moana is barely 5 or 6 years old and was a nice little animated movie and had cutting edge animation at the time and really isn't that old, but it's already being made into a remake. And we've seen it with a slew of other Disney movies. Everything is getting live action. And the latest one is Snow White. Of course, this is not your grandma's Snow White. This is not the Snow White that we grew up with as children, watching this pretty little animated princess flit around in the forest with singing birds and all of that stuff. There's not even dwarves in this thing. This isn't even Snow White and the 7 Dwarves. This is Snow White, the obnoxious feminist anthem or something. Many details have been changed about this film. Lots of photos and snippets have come out. Disney, as a matter of fact, when the first photo was leaked, I believe to the Daily Mail, showing that this film wasn't even going to include 7 dwarves. The 7 dwarves have become, the 7 random homeless people of indeterminate height, gender, and ethnicity. The photos ended up getting leaked to the Daily Mail. At first, Disney even tried to deny that they were real. Because again, it's almost like they don't even want to own their own woke agenda. This time, they're so far down the rabbit hole when it comes to this stuff. They've sold out entirely for this agenda, but they also know that so many people don't want it, and they're getting sick and tired of it, and they're pushing back on all of this garbage. And I think they're almost not even willing to own it themselves, but they're too far in, and they've caved to the woke mob, and now they have to continue down this rabbit hole that they've sort of dug for themselves. And so here we have Snow White. The seven dwarves are no longer the seven dwarves. They are seven random people. There's like one dwarf in there, and then there's a whole bunch of other people look like they just popped out of an Oliver Twist movie, like you could have picked them up on the streets of San Francisco. Just random people. There's a couple of girls thrown in there. Most of them are not short. They're all different ethnicities. They look absolutely nothing like what you remember from the animated film. And what's interesting that I find here is, especially when it comes to the dwarves, I think that's that's kind of I'm not sure that Disney actually achieved the goal that they set there. They wanted to make a Snow White that was racially diverse, gender diverse, that really, was all inclusive, because of course the original 1937 film had a white princess and a white prince and seven white dwarves. And we can't have too much whiteness. God knows that's the most evil thing on the planet these days. So we have to have a whole bunch of, we can't have dwarves as traditionally understood, because that would be discriminatory. What I find interesting about that is I actually think that it would have been fantastic had you cast seven people who could have gone on to launch their careers off of a movie like this. Seven people with dwarfism, seven people with, any number of conditions that may have led them to not grow quite as tall as the average person, people that might be finding it a little hard to break into what is still an industry that rewards certain stereotypes, whether Hollywood wants to admit it or not. You could have had people with different conditions or different disabilities or different things that made them physically different, that they could have showcased that, and they could have been cast in a blockbuster film. And that could have actually helped launch people's careers. And instead, in an effort to be woke, in an effort to not offend anybody, in an effort to make sure that everything is diverse and we don't want to make it look like we're stereotyping anybody, instead, Disney just went out and cast a whole bunch of relatively otherwise normal people. And I actually think that's a bit of a missed opportunity there. And this just kind of goes to show you that in an effort to be woke, in an effort to be super progressive, you end up actually doing the opposite. You end up holding people back, because you're too busy trying to push this narrative that you have in your head, or that you think is going to satisfy some segment, of this woke mob that's going to be out for your head if you don't do things exactly the way that they want. And so I think that that's a major missed opportunity. Another major detail that's being changed here is Snow White's ethnicity. Snow White, of course, in the original German fairy tale and in the original 1937 film and in many of the subsequent remakes, is a white girl, Snow White. That's not because whiteness is the best. That's not because there's anything particularly special about being a Caucasian. It's not about that. It's just the idea of who is the fairest of them all just took on a literal meaning. There was symbolism to that. Not an attempt to slam any other races or any other ethnicities. But of course, Disney can't have a white princess. We've seen that in several remakes. We have to cast everybody of a different ethnicity, because white people had their heyday and now we can't cast any white people anymore. So Snow White is being played by Rachel Zegler. She's a Latina actress. So Snow White is Snow Not So White at this point. And one of the biggest details that has been changed is apparently the princess in this new remake is some feminist icon who doesn't need a prince to save her, and she's a leader in her own right, and blah, 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 blah. Insert giant feminist trope here. In several recent interviews, Rachel Zegler, the actress who is playing this part, and Gal Gadot, who plays the evil queen in the film, basically said, look, we're not going to have a traditional Snow White, because that is an outdated, misogynist piece of garbage, and we're going to take it to a whole different level. Here's what they had to say.
That the cartoon was made 85 years ago, and therefore it's extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power and what a woman is fit for in the world. And so when we came to reimagining the actual role of Snow White, it became about the fairest of them all, meaning who is the most just. and who can become a fantastic leader. And the reality is, Snow White has to learn a lot of lessons about coming into her own power before she can come into power over a kingdom.
Also, the fact that she's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's the proactive one, and she's the one who set the terms, is what makes it so relevant.
So it's not 1937 anymore. It's not 1937 anymore, and this young lady does not need a prince to save her. And it completely steps on the idea of this fairy tale, what this fairy tale is about. She's not looking for true love. She's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's going to be dreaming about, becoming a fearless leader. Yes, just what every single girl dreams of. And it's not that little girls can't be leaders. It's not that we shouldn't teach young women to be leaders, but to do so by stepping on the notion that little girls shouldn't be dreaming of romance. They shouldn't be dreaming of, finding a male partner that can protect them and provide for them, that this is outdated, 1930s junk. We don't need that anymore. It's tossing out gender roles in general and stepping all over the idea that romance, that love, that beauty, that these aren't things to be aspiring to. These aren't things to be striving for. These aren't goals in life. And replacing it with this tired mantra that a little girl can be a leader all by herself. This is not, by the way, every time something like this happens, every time a movie like this comes out, these actors or these producers or these Hollywood elites that are pushing this narrative act like they're the first ones to come up with it. Well, we're really breaking boundaries here because, this is a princess that's not going to be dreaming about a prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love, and she's not going to have somebody come and save her. This is getting as tired as the damsel in distress trope at this point. This is just as old. This isn't a new idea. This is a rah-rah feminist line that's been peddled now for years. It's not original. It's boring. It's boring. And yet, at the complete lack of having any new ideas or any positive lessons to teach little girls, they just come up with the same old stuff. And they do it over and over and over again. We have seen it in recent examples. Peter Pan, for example, the latest iteration of Peter Pan that features not lost boys, but lost boys and girls. Because again, we can't have a group of boys. That's not gender inclusive. That's not, that's too exclusionary. We have to make sure that girls are included, which is extremely frustrating because if you know anything about Peter Pan was a book. Peter Pan was not just a Disney movie in the beginning. Peter Pan was a book. And one of the biggest themes of the Peter Pan story is the idea of little boys growing up and becoming men, and the role that a mother plays in the life of a son. That's one of the main themes of this book. It's not all just mermaids and pirates with hooks for arms. There are deeper underlying themes of growing up and of the role of a parent to a child. The whole point of Wendy coming in and being a mother to these little lost boys is the idea that they don't have a mother. They don't have anyone to teach them, to nurture them, to guide them. They are lost boys. They're left to fend for themselves. And in doing so, they don't know how to grow up. There is a lesson and a theme about boyhood specifically in that book. And so when you take that and you say, okay, we're not going to have lost boys anymore. We're going to have lost boys and girls. Well, congratulations. You just made it much more diverse. You just threw girls in for the sake of it to make sure that they're represented. But you've stepped on one of the major themes of the book and one of the key reasons why the story exists in the first place. I think this is part of the reason why people got so frustrated with The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid featuring a black actress playing the role of Ariel as opposed to a white actress, which would have better represented, the original Little Mermaid Disney film. course, it was a white princess with flaming red hair. And instead, you had a black Ariel with kind of sort of red hair. And I don't think that any of the pushback, at least that I saw, or from anybody that I talked to, or from myself, had anything to do with not wanting to see a black princess. That's not the problem. The problem is not, oh, well, Ariel's black and we just don't like that because we don't want to see black people represented on screen, or we don't want to see a black princess. That wasn't the point. The point was that this was a fairy tale that originated over in, Holland, or the Netherlands. And frankly, a bunch of white people over there. And the original Disney film featured an Ariel that became iconic with the shock of red hair. That was different. There wasn't another princess like that. I actually know quite a few little girls with red hair that grew up feeling like, oh, that's really cool. There's a princess with red hair. Changing that, it has nothing to do with we don't want a black princess. It's the frustration with change for change's sake, diversity for diversity's sake. You're throwing it in there not because it enhances the story, not because it makes anything better, but simply because you're saying it's not good enough anymore to have a white princess. We now have to diversify this to push the issue. Again, not because it adds anything to the story, not because it makes anything better, not because it corrects something that should have been that way from the beginning. Now we have to take the Little Mermaid and we have to move her from Europe, and we have to set it up in the Caribbean and have a black princess. And oh, by the way, all of her sisters are going to be represented by all these other ethnicities, which means that King Triton must have seriously gotten around the 7 seas, let me tell you. And it's all for diversity's sake. Again, even when it steps on key themes of the original stories, like Snow White, you have 7 dwarves, you have Snow White's skin being symbolic of one of the greater themes of the movie. You have the idea of a prince saving a princess and restoring confidence in the idea that true love conquers all. These are major themes of these movies. And when you throw in diversity, when you throw in feminism, when you throw in gender inclusion, you do so at the expense of the story. And it just irritates people, and it irritates audiences who don't want this shoved down their throats when it feels inorganic. It feels unnatural. It feels like you're doing it to make a point. And that's exactly what Disney is doing. And they do it over and over and over again. And again, I've seen a little bit of pushback in recent weeks with movies that have come out and conservative commenters who have talked about it. And a lot of people want to know, okay, why is this important? Here we are, it's a Disney movie, for heaven's sake. Why does it take this much analysis? Why spend so much time harping on this? Because this kind of junk, this is why this is important. This kind of junk, feminism, anti-maleness, anti-man sentiment, gender neutrality, pushing ethnic diversity into every facet, even when it's not necessary or it doesn't make sense or it requires changing fundamental pieces of a story. All of that is what's being shoved on our kids every single day. You may not care about the Snow White remake. You may say, I'm not going to go see that dumb thing in theaters anyway, and I wouldn't stream it if you paid me. That's fine. Kids are being exposed to it. This is what this new generation of children is going to grow up with. We grew up with animated films. Those were iconic to us as children. We can quote every line. We wore clothes with those faces on them. Those were fundamental pieces of our entertainment as children. That's what these films are going to be to today's generation. And it's important to know what's in them, and it's important to understand the subtle messaging that's being put. That's what's the most frightening here. All of this is being done in very subtle ways. The left markets this stuff, especially to kids, in ways that make you feel like you can't argue with it. Case in point, the other day, I sometimes let my children watch Sesame Street. I haven't very often because even Sesame Street has gone far left. They have pushed non-traditional families and LGBTQ agendas. There have been multiple episodes that I have found incredibly objectionable. This is not the Sesame Street that I grew up with. This is a new woke Sesame Street. They have pushed the Black Lives Matter race baiting agenda. So I am very cautious when I let my kids watch Sesame Street, but they also have episodes that are very educational. I try not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I just try to be discerning, and I try to filter some of the stuff that I see that I don't want to expose my kids to. And so I try to be discerning, and I was letting them watch Sesame Street. It was an episode that I had never seen before. And it starts with a whole bunch of these little characters. They're puppets. They're not real. A whole bunch of these little characters, and they're playing dress up. And that's the premise. The premise starts innocently enough. All of these little puppets playing dress up and teaching kids, you can use your imagination in your home and play dress up too. Fine. Fair enough. Whatever. So I'm in my kitchen. And I'm whatever I'm doing, putting a dish away or something. And I'm, listening out the side of my one ear to this episode. Next thing I know, one of the little female puppets reaches for a superhero costume. And the adult in charge says, no, you can't wear a superhero costume. You have to be a princess, right? And the little female puppet, the little girl puppet says, well, what if I don't want to be a princess? I want to go play superheroes. I think that's cool. I want to save the day. I don't want to be a princess. And the adult forces her to put on a princess costume and says, you can't be a superhero. Superheroes are for boys. Girls dress as princesses. And we go through this cycle a few times before someone else steps in and says, well, that's ridiculous. Of course she can be a superhero. Girls don't always have to be princesses. And so that's the way this topic is introduced. Right? It's introduced in this way that makes you feel like, well, I see the agenda here. The feminist line that girls shouldn't be princesses, girls can do anything that boys can do, girls should be superheroes, girls can save the day. And it makes you feel like that's something you shouldn't argue against, right? Because if you say, look, I've got a problem with you pushing this feminist line. Well, what do you think? Girls should always be princesses and boys should always be superheroes, and there should never be any crossover, and a girl can't ever be a superhero? Are you telling me you never want your daughter to look up to a Marvel character? She's always got to be some damsel in distress stuck in a tower. Is that what you're saying? Well, no, of course that's not what I'm saying. And do you see how they introduce this like it's something you shouldn't argue with? And then what happened next really gave the game away. After this little girl puppet had changed into a superhero costume, Cookie Monster comes on screen. And of course, we all know Cookie Monster. He's a male character, big, low voice, right? Cookie. Everybody understands Cookie Monster is a boy. And he's wearing a pink tutu. He's not wearing, what a male ballet dancer would wear in Swan Lake or whatever, which is already, quite frankly, sort of frou-frou enough. He's not wearing a pair of tights. He's wearing a pink tutu. And of course, the same adult character comes on, no, boys can't be ballet dancers. Well, no, boys can be ballet dancers and girls can be superheroes. And that's the message that gets pushed. And Cookie Monster is standing there in a pink tutu. And I'm looking at it going, okay, that is the message that's being pushed here. It's not that girls can be superheroes. It's not that girls don't always have to be simpering princesses that need someone to come save them. That's not the message. The message is that girls can be boys and boys can be girls. There is no line. There is no difference. Gender doesn't mean anything. There are no gender roles. Boys can dress in pink tutus and girls can dress in a suit of armor. And that's representative of the message that's coming through my television at that point. There's no such thing as a boy and there's no such thing as a girl. Because either one can do what the other does, and there's no line. Do you see the subtlety here? They present it in a way that makes you feel like you can't argue with it. And then they take it to that next level once they've got your silence. And that's how the left operates. And that's why this stuff is so important to pay attention to, because this is the stuff that's being put in front of our kids every single day by Hollywood. It comes through our television. It comes through the movies that they watch, oftentimes when we're not even there to see it. And it's dangerous. Of course, if you're concerned about what your kids are watching, you should probably also be concerned about where your money's going. Every single year, millions of Americans, just like you, pay exorbitant premiums for health coverage that they don't end up using and that they don't need, but that costs a ton of money and ends up going to subsidize medical costs that they don't agree with, like people's abortions or gender mutilation surgeries. If you want to save tons of money while making sure that you are not subsidizing medical costs that go against your values and go against your beliefs, you need to check out Share Healthcare. Share Healthcare is not traditional health insurance. I'm partnering with Share Healthcare to let people know about their faith-based cost-sharing program between people who believe the same thing and also want to save a little bit of money. So if you're sick of paying too much for health insurance, go to sharehealthcare.com, enter the referral code MRCTV23. That's sharehealthcare.com, MRCTV23, and see how you can start saving money today. And with plans that start as low as $149 a month, keeping a clean conscience just got easier. So all of this erasure of the role of women, the role of men, this attempt to tell girls and young women that, they don't need men, being a wife and a mother are not noble things to pursue in life. Romance is dead. There's no fairy tale. You're your own fairy tale. You're enough all by yourself. Go save yourself. All of that garbage that we see shoved in Snow White, that we see shoved in children's programs, all of that leads to sad, bitter women who will get to the end of their lives and find themselves all alone. Case in point, Chelsea Handler. So Chelsea Handler, if you don't know, she's a comedian. She's wildly obnoxious, but she has a decent following. And she crops up every now and then because she is a bitter shrew. And this is just the latest example of that. Chelsea here went on a rant on social media in response to Jedediah Bila. She's a YouTuber and a former Fox News host. And she criticized Handler's constant bragging about how happy she is because she doesn't have kids. This is one of Handler's kind of claims to fame. She really likes to cut videos and go on late night talk shows and things like that, talking about how great it is to be single and childless with a bunch of money and be able to, sleep all day and then smoke a bunch of weed. It's her trope. It's obnoxious and she does it all the time. And so Jedediah mentioned that women with families and children are living much more fulfilled, happy lives than bitter shrews who intentionally shy away from getting married and having a family. Again, not talking about women who desire those things and are waiting, not talking about women who are single or who are married and can't have children for some medical reason or any of those categories at all. We're talking specifically about women who actively shove those things aside in favor of living supposedly carefree, responsibility-free lives because they think that not having to answer to anybody or not having to do anything for anybody is going to make them ultimately happier. Wildly selfish way of living, and completely misses the forest for the trees and tosses out the most fulfilling things in life for temporary ease and enjoyment. But apparently Chelsea Handler has to continue to push this notion that she is the happiest person on the planet. Here's her response.
Listen up, Jedediah. I don't know if that's your real name or your sister wife name, but I have some downtime between my back-to-back champagne brunches this morning. According to Paul Dolan, who is a professor of behavioral science at the London School of Economics, which is a pretty good school, women who are single with no children are happiest. Dolan says that recent data shows that long-established traditional symbols of success like marriage and motherhood, do not necessarily correlate with happiness levels. And if you don't believe me, just ask this happily married mom of 4 how things are working out for her. I really thought those two were gonna make it. I always heard that the couple who gives a town diarrhea together stays together. But apparently that's a no. Oh, and don't worry, Jedediah, this wine won't make me red or puffy. Since I don't have kids to pay for, I have extra money and I bought a hyperbaric chamber. So it's great for the skin, my circulation, so I can just drink and do as many drugs as I want and then I come back in here and flip it and reverse it. Peace be unto you.
So first off, if you're constantly having to brag about how awesome your life is because you don't have kids, I've got a hard time believing that you're not a miserable hag who's trying to convince everyone, including yourself, that this garbage path you've chosen is working out well. If you're constantly having to cut videos about how happy you are and how great your life is, you ain't happy and your life ain't great. I'm sorry. If you were genuinely happy with that, you would just go and do and be. You would go live your life. You would go not have your children. And that would be the end of it. But when you're constantly having to get on social media and validate yourself and preach to everybody about how great your life is in an effort to convince everyone that this is the best life path to choose and it's really working out for you and it's fantastic, when you have to respond to everybody who may have a different viewpoint, it sounds an awful lot like you are utterly miserable and trying desperately to convince yourself and everyone else that you're happy. You're not happy. If you were happy, you wouldn't have to say so. Secondly here, Handler actually points to a debunked study to prove this point, which is hilarious because that making these corny videos is literally all she's got. So she points to this study in an effort to make it sound like she's just got it made in the shade. And, I've even got the numbers to prove it. I've got the science to prove it because, again, she doesn't actually have any other evidence to prove it other than her constant harping about it. She points to a study that was published back in May by a guy named Paul Dolan. The study wasn't published by him. He analyzed a survey and he published an analysis in a book that he released. And so this study back in May was from I should start with this. Paul Dolan, first of all, he's a London School of Economics behavioral science professor. And he claimed, based on this study that he read, that he analyzed, that, quote, women who are single with no children are happiest, and that traditional symbols of success, like marriage and motherhood, those things, don't, quote, necessarily correlate with happiness levels. And he made it out to be that women who are married are actually much more miserable than they typically let on. This analysis that he has is based on the American Time Use Survey. There's just one problem. Dolan completely misinterpreted the results of the survey. So his entire foundation for his premise is in error. So here's what he claimed. He claimed that the survey found that married women claim to be happy at higher rates than unmarried childless women, but only when their spouses were in the room. When their spouses weren't in the room, married women said they were miserable. But that's not actually true. That's not what the study found at all. So in the actual study, it cited women whose, quote, spouses were absent. But that didn't refer to women whose husbands had simply walked away to get a drink of water and came right back into the room. It wasn't like they sat these women down in front of their husbands and said, hey, are you happy? And the women said, absolutely. And then they said, all right, John, can you exit stage left for 5 minutes? And then the woman goes, actually, to tell you the truth, I am miserable. My life sucks. That's not what happened. When the study references women whose spouses were absent, it was referring to married women whose spouses no longer lived in the same home as them, which you would expect would probably be miserable. So we're talking about women who were going through a divorce, who were separated. That's what the study meant by spouses were absent. So Dolan gets this wrong. He paints this picture of a bunch of women that are sitting there in such fear of their husbands that they have to say that they're happy until their husband is out of earshot, and then they admit to being absolutely miserable, even though that's not what happened at all. So Dolan's entire index for marital misery was completely wrong. Married women who weren't separated from their spouses were not miserable. In fact, they reported higher levels of happiness than unmarried childless women by far. The study actually found that married women with children reported being very happy at a rate of 41%. For single, never married women, their reported rates of being very happy were at 24% for those without children. Married women with children, 41% reported being very happy. Single, never married women without children, the Chelsea Handlers of the world, 24%. So Dolan was actually made aware of this error. To his credit, he did acknowledge that he had made a mistake. He contacted The Guardian to amend his article because they were the ones that first published it, and his editor to make the revisions to his book. So he even recanted this and took it back. But that didn't stop Handler from spouting this debunked myth that child-free single living makes for the happiest women. When in fact, multiple other studies have shown that married women are largely happier than their unmarried counterparts, even to the point of being physically and mentally healthier. There was a study published earlier this year in the Global Epidemiology Journal. A team of Harvard researchers looked at a 25-year span of data from a large sampling of American female nurses and found that the women that became married and stayed married over the course of the study showed a 35% decrease in the risk of all-cause mortality, lower risks of cardiovascular disease, and a greater psychological well-being on multiple indicators, including greater positive effect, purpose in life, hope, and optimism. They are literally mentally and physically healthier for getting married. And there are multiple studies that have pointed to having children and having families as contributing to the psychological benefit of men and women. Multiple studies have borne that out over years. All you've got to do is do a quick Google and you will find some. That doesn't mean that every moment is bliss. That doesn't mean that there aren't chapters in life that are more difficult. Right now, I've got 2 small children that demand an incredible amount of time and attention. That's what small children do. There's very little that they can do for themselves. To the point of getting their own milk in the morning, they can't reach the shelf. I am at a chapter in my life where it takes a lot of physical and mental activity just to get through my day. Because with a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, that's just what they require. So absolutely, there are going to be stages of life, whether it's stages of marriage or it's stages of raising children, that are going to be more difficult. There are going to be chapters that are easier. It ebbs and flows. That's life. There is no time where you just reach this plateau of copacetic bliss where everything is wonderful. I don't care if you are single and childless. Your days aren't all roses every single day either. So to paint this picture that marriage and motherhood, or parenthood in general, if you're a guy, dooms your happiness. You never have any money. Somebody's always demanding something of you. You're absolutely miserable all the time. How would Chelsea Handler know? She's never tried it, for heaven's sake. Here she is demonizing an entire way of life from a standpoint of complete and total ignorance. And the problem is that women are buying into this. We have plummeting birth rates. And I understand that that's wrapped up in other factors. I understand that that's not as simple as, well, we told women not to go out and get a prince, and so they stopped going out and finding truth. There's other factors. There's economic factors. A lot of millennials and Gen Zers have bought into the line that climate change is going to kill us all, and that if they have children, they're just selfishly murdering the planet, and they don't want to bring children into this world if we're all going to just die in a fiery apocalypse or whatever. That's absolutely ridiculous. But surveys have found that there's actually a lot of younger people in the childbearing age demographic that have bought into that. Others have said, look, life is dang expensive right now. I can barely keep my own head above water, much less have children. Great, by the way, argument for getting married and staying married, because 2 incomes is better than 1. So there's that. So there's other factors. But part of what's playing into it here is that we have told little girls, you can be your own hero. You don't need a man. If you want a strong husband who provides for you and protects his family, then you are stuck in the 1950s and you're an embarrassment to all women. We have told girls this. It starts with turning traditional fairy tales like Snow White, simple stories of love and of hope and of beauty and of innocence, and turning them into man-bashing feminist anthems. This is the problem with the new Barbie movie. This is why you see so many conservative commentators talking about it. It is important to talk about. I understand that this is a movie that has more adult themes. A lot of parents that have taken their young children to see it have complained that it's actually more of an adult movie than a child movie, but it's about a child's toy. It's the personification of a child's toy. Barbie is meant for little girls. It is a plaything. So to take the concept of Barbie and use it as a platform to make a movie that bashes men and masculinity, that makes a mockery of men, is yet another example of this ideology being pushed on children and through children's mediums and in ways, in areas that children are going to gravitate toward. And it begins building in a little girl's brain that she doesn't need a man. She doesn't need to be a wife or a mom. There's no gender roles. She was not created by God Almighty to complement a man, but rather to compete with him and to prove that she is better and stronger and tougher than him. That is her goal. That is what she should be concerned with. Not in finding a good husband, not in finding a provider or a protector. Those are bad things. And conversely, little boys are told that everything that is innate within them, the desire to protect, the desire to provide, every masculine quality that they have, that's toxic. That's toxic. And if you display that, you are wrong. You are disgusting. We will take you out into the public square and crucify you. And that's the line that's being taught children. And it's working. It starts with instilling that image early, and it's working. And that's why harping about these movies matters so much. It's why making sure you know what your children are watching matters so much. And this subliminal messaging, this subtle messaging. Well, you want your little girl to be strong, don't you? You don't want your daughter to just grow up and think that she can't do anything on her own and needs some man to make all the money, do you? You don't want your little boy growing up to be some butch domineering, caveman, do you? And it takes that subtle message and it turns it into a dangerous ideology that then starts to permeate through generations. And it creates confused adolescents who become confused adults who don't understand their role in the world, who are fighting against their innate nature, who believe that they are enough on their own, who end up sacrificing long-term joy for short-term fleeting feelings of happiness. And we end up with a bitter, lonely society. And then we wonder why we have all kinds of mental health issues and problems with people who don't know their place in life and can't seem to hold down a decent relationship and are floundering. So if you don't think that it starts with things like a Snow White reboot that's going to teach a generation of little girls to be feminist banshees, that's the root. That's the root. And with that, that's the Brittany Hughes Show for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you will be back here next Thursday. In the meantime, make sure you head on over to Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button on the Brittany Hughes Show. That way you won't ever miss an episode. While you're over there, subscribe to the Newsbusters podcast. That one's with Tim Graham. It's on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So we give you lots of content to listen to. And then head on over to sharehealthcare.com, enter that referral code MRCTV23, and find a cost sharing plan that works for you today. And with that, I will see you guys back here next Thursday. Hope you have a great weekend. God bless.